The storm roared over Port Royal like a beast unleashed, its howl tearing through the Caribbean night in 1720. Rain lashed the weathered docks, each drop stinging like a whip against the splintered wood. Captain Elias Crow stood alone at the edge of a crumbling pier, his scarred face lit by flashes of lightning that carved jagged scars across the sky. His tattered coat, once the proud black of a pirate captain, flapped uselessly in the gale, soaked through to his bones. In his calloused hand he clutched a single gold coin, his last. The weight of it felt heavier than the anchor of his lost ship, the Black Dawn. It was his only ticket out of this cursed town, a place where every shadow hid a blade and every smile masked a betrayal. Elias was 40 now, but the years at sea had carved him older. His limp, a gift from a cannonball that shattered his leg a decade ago, throbbed with the damp. His gray eyes, once sharp as a cutlass, were dulled by the ghosts of his past. Raids gone wrong, a crew lost to treachery, a life drowned in rum and regret. He'd been a pirate captain once, feared from Nassau to Tortuga, but that was before his first mate sold them out to the colonial navy for a pardon and a purse. Now Port Royal was his prison and this coin was his key to freedom. One passage on a merchant ship, one chance to sail away from the memories that haunted him. The wind screamed, carrying the scent of salt and rot from the harbor. Elias tightened his grip on the coin, its edges biting into his palm. He could almost hear the creak of a ship's rigging, the promise of a new horizon. But then a sound cut through the storm, a weak, trembling voice from the alley behind him. "Please, sir, a coin for bread?" He turned, his bad leg nearly buckling on the slick pier. There, huddled against a stack of rotting barrels, was a boy, no older than 16. His ragged clothes clung to his thin frame, soaked by the rain, and his face was gaunt, hollowed by hunger. Dark hair plastered his forehead, but his eyes, green as the sea after a storm, burned with a desperate fire. He stretched out a trembling hand, his fingers skeletal, his lips cracked and bloodless. "Just one coin," he whispered, "and I'll be gone." Elias's heart, hardened by years of betrayal, clenched like a fist. He'd seen beggars before. Port Royal was crawling with them, each with a sob story to pry loose a coin or a crust. But something about this boy was different. Maybe it was the way his voice shook, not just with hunger but with fear. Maybe it was the locket glinting faintly around his neck, its intricate crest catching a flicker of lightning, a symbol Elias couldn't place but felt he should know. Or maybe it was the memory of another boy long ago, who'd begged for mercy on a burning deck and gotten none. His hand hovered over the coin. Give it away and he'd be trapped here, penniless, at the mercy of a town that chewed up men like him and spat out bones. Keep it and he could be on a ship by dawn, sailing toward a life where no one knew his name or his sins. The smart thing, the safe thing was to walk away. But those green eyes locked onto his, and Elias felt something crack inside him, a wall he'd built to keep the world out. "If you were Elias," he muttered to himself, barely audible over the storm, "would you give your last chance at freedom to a stranger who might not survive the night? Or would you walk away and save yourself? Tell me in the comments because what happens next will change everything." His fingers loosened almost against his will. The coin spun through the air, glinting like a falling star before the boy caught it with a gasp. "Lucien," the boy whispered, his voice barely carrying over the wind as he clutched the gold to his chest. "My name's Lucien." Then he was gone, vanishing into the alley's shadows like a ghost swallowed by the storm. Elias stood frozen, the weight of his decision settling like lead in his gut. The pier creaked beneath him, the sea churned, and for a moment he thought he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Then he heard it, boots splashing through puddles, the clink of swords against belts. He turned slowly, his bad leg screaming, and saw them. 6 colonial soldiers, their red coats stark against the gray rain, led by a man whose cold eyes Elias knew too well. Captain Heir, the governor's enforcer, a man who'd sell his own mother for a profit and sleep soundly after. "Evening, Crow," Heir called, his voice smooth as oil but sharp as a blade. "We're looking for a fugitive. Young lad, ragged clothes about yay high." He held a hand at chest level, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Blood trail leads right to this pier. You wouldn't have seen him, would you?" Elias's stomach dropped. A fugitive? The boy, Lucien, hadn't just been a beggar. Those eyes, that locket, the way he'd run. Elias's act of kindness had just painted a target on his back. The soldiers fanned out, hands on their swords, and Heir stepped closer, his boots squelching in the mud. "You know what happens to men who harbor fugitives, Crow. Governor's orders, no mercy." The storm roared louder, as if nature itself was warning Elias of the danger closing in. His hand drifted to the dagger hidden under his coat, his mind racing. He could lie, claim ignorance and hope Heir believed him. Or he could stand his ground, knowing it might cost him everything. The locket's crest flashed in his memory, a puzzle he couldn't solve but couldn't ignore. If you're hooked on this tale of pirates, secrets and a single coin that might cost a man his life, hit that subscribe button. Elias's story seemed to whisper through the storm. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. The soldiers were closing in, their blades catching the lightning's glow. Elias's bad leg trembled, but his eyes never left Heir's. Somewhere in the shadows, Lucien was running, carrying Elias's last hope with him. And as the rain pounded down, Elias knew one thing for certain. His life as a solitary outcast was over. The only question was whether he'd live long enough to find out why. The rain hammered Port Royal's cobblestone streets, each drop a gunshot in the suffocating dark of 1720. Elias Crow limped through a narrow alley, his bad legs screaming with every step, the storm's howl chasing him like a pack of wolves. His tattered coat clung to his frame, heavy with water and regret. That gold coin, his lifeline, was gone, given to a beggar boy named Lucien whose desperate green eyes had cracked something in Elias's hardened heart. Now Captain Heir's soldiers were on his heels, their boots splashing closer, their swords hungry for blood. Elias had been a pirate once, feared across the Caribbean, but tonight he was prey, hunted for a single act of kindness that might cost him everything. He ducked behind a stack of barrels, the reek of fish and rum thick in the air. His breath came in sharp gasps, each one laced with the memory of his old life. 10 years ago he'd been Captain Elias Crow of the Black Dawn, a ship that struck terror from Nassau to Barbados. His crew had been his family, loyal through storms and cannon fire, until his first mate, Silas Kane, sold them out to the colonial navy for a pardon and a sack of silver. The betrayal had left Elias broken, his ship burned, his men dead or scattered. He'd sworn never to trust again, to live alone in Port Royal's shadows, where no one could stab him in the back. But Lucien's trembling voice, that fleeting glimpse of a royal crest on his locket, had dragged Elias back into a world he tried to forget. The alley's walls closed in, slick with moss and secrets. Elias pressed himself against the stone, listening as Heir's men fanned out, their voices cutting through the storm. "Crow's here somewhere," one growled, his sword scraping against a crate. "Find him and we find the boy." Heir's cold drawl followed, sharp as a blade. "He's a pirate, lads. No honor, no loyalty. He'll sell the fugitive for a bottle of rum." Elias's jaw tightened. Heir didn't know him, didn't know the code he'd lived by even in his darkest days. But Heir knew enough to make Elias's life a living hell. The captain was the governor's right hand, a man who profited from smuggling, extortion and worse. His red coat hid a heart blacker than any pirate's, and his pursuit of Lucien wasn't about justice, it was about power. Elias's hand drifted to the dagger at his belt, its hilt worn smooth from years of use. He could still hear the creak of the Black Dawn's rigging, the laughter of his crew under a starlit sky. Those memories burned, but they also steadied him. He'd survived betrayals before, he could survive this. His eyes scanned the alley, spotting a flickering light at the far end. A tavern, its windows glowing like a beacon in the storm. If he could reach it, he might lose the soldiers in the crowd. But every step risked exposure, and Lucien, wherever he was, might already be gone. The tavern door swung open as Elias slipped inside, the stench of sweat and ale hitting him like a fist. Sailors and merchants crowded the room, their voices a drunken roar over the clatter of mugs. Elias kept his head low, his limp more pronounced as he wove through the chaos, blending into the shadows. He found a corner table, its wood scarred from years of brawls, and sank into a chair, his heart pounding. The storm outside rattled the shutters, but it was the whispers at the next table that froze his blood. "Heard the Spanish air's alive," a grizzled sailor muttered, his voice low. "Lost prince hiding in Port Royal. Governor's men are tearing the town apart to find him." His companion, a merchant with a missing ear, leaned closer. "Boy's got a locket, they say. Royal crest. Worth a fortune to the man who turns him in." Elias's mind reeled. Lucien's locket, that crest glinting in the lightning's flash. Could the beggar boy be the heir to the Spanish Empire? The idea was madness, but it explained Heir's desperation, the soldiers' relentless hunt. If Lucien was a prince, his survival threatened the governor's grip on Port Royal, a town built on corruption and blood. Elias's act of kindness hadn't just made him a target, it had thrust him into a game of empires where the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. His eyes darted to the tavern's shadows, and there, crouched behind a barrel, was Lucien. The boy's green eyes met his, wide with fear but sharp with something else. Defiance, maybe, or hope. He still clutched the gold coin, his knuckles white as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the world. Elias's chest tightened. He could call out, turn the boy over, and maybe Harrow would let him walk away. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to save himself. But the memory of Silas Kane's betrayal, the screams of his crew as the black dawn burned, stopped him cold. He'd failed them once. He wouldn't fail again. If you were Elias, the story seemed to whisper through the tavern's din, would you risk everything for a stranger who might be lying, or hand him over to save your own skin? Tell me in the comments, because Elias's next move will decide his fate. Before he could act, the tavern door slammed open, the storm's howl flooding the room. A soldier stood silhouetted against the rain, his red coat dripping, his sword gleaming in the candlelight. His eyes locked onto Elias, recognition flashing across his face. "Captain Crow," he shouted, his voice cutting through the crowd like a cannon shot. "You're a dead man." Swords scraped free of scabbards as more soldiers poured in, their boots pounding the floorboards. The tavern fell silent, every eye on Elias. His bad leg throbbed, his dagger felt too small, and Lucien's desperate gaze burned into him from the shadows. The soldiers advanced, their blades catching the flickering light. Elias's past had caught up with him, and the boy he'd helped was about to drag him into a war he couldn't win. If you're gripped by this tale of betrayal and redemption, smash that like button and keep watching. The story urged, the words weaving through the chaos. Because Elias's next move will change everything, and the truth about Lucien will shake Port Royal to its core. The tavern's air was thick with the stench of ale and fear, the storm's roar shaking the walls of Port Royal in 1720. Elias Crow stood frozen, his bad leg aching under his tattered coat, as Captain Harrow's soldiers fanned out across the room, their swords glinting like sharks' teeth in the candlelight. The shout of, "Captain Crow, you're a dead man," still echoed, silencing the drunken sailors and merchants who now stared wide-eyed at the former pirate. In the shadows behind a barrel, Lucien's green eyes burned with terror, the boy clutching Elias's gold coin as if it could shield him from the blades closing in. Elias's hand hovered over his dagger, his heart pounding like war drums. He'd given his last chance at freedom to this beggar, and now the colonial navy was here to make him pay for it. The lead soldier, a brute with a scar splitting his lip, stepped forward, his boots thudding on the warped floorboards. "Where's the boy, Crow?" he snarled, his blade pointing at Elias's chest. "Hand him over and maybe the governor lets you live." Elias's mind raced, the memory of Lucien's locket, that royal crest flashing in the storm, gnawing at him. Was the boy really the heir to the Spanish Empire, or just a liar who dragged Elias into a death trap? The smart thing was to point to the barrel, to walk away and let Harrow's men have their prize. But the ghosts of the Black Dawn, his crew lost to betrayal, whispered in his ears. He'd failed them. He wouldn't fail Lucien. Elias's eyes flicked to the tavern's back wall, where a loose plank hid a smuggler's passage from his pirating days. "Move," he hissed under his breath, barely audible, signaling Lucien with a glance. The boy's face tightened, but he nodded, inching toward the wall as Elias stepped forward, drawing every eye. "You want a fugitive?" Elias growled, his voice rough as gravel. "All I see is a tavern full of cowards in red coats." The soldiers bristled and the scarred one lunged, but Elias was faster, his bad leg forgotten as he dodged and shoved a table into the man's path. The crash of wood and mugs bought him seconds, and he bolted for the passage, Lucien scrambling behind him. They tumbled into a derelict shipyard, the air heavy with the reek of rotting timber and seaweed. The storm raged on, lightning casting jagged shadows across broken masts and skeletal hulls. Elias barred the passage door with a rusted anchor chain, his breath ragged. "Talk, boy," he demanded, turning to Lucien, whose soaked rags clung to his trembling frame. "Who are you and why's Harrow ready to burn this town to find you?" Lucien's green eyes met his, no longer just desperate but fierce, like a cornered animal ready to fight. "My name is Lucien de la Vega," he said, his voice steady despite the rain dripping from his hair. "I'm the last heir to the Spanish Empire. My father was murdered in a coup, and I was smuggled here to hide." He pulled the locket from his neck, its royal crest gleaming even in the dim light, a crowned lion, unmistakable. "The governor and Harrow work for the usurper. They want me dead so the empire stays theirs." Elias's stomach twisted. His last gold coin, tossed to a beggar in a moment of weakness, had bound him to a prince. He'd thrown away his escape for a boy who could topple an empire, or get them both killed. You're mad, Elias muttered, but the locket's weight in his hand felt like truth, heavy as cannon shot. Lucien's voice broke, softer now. You gave me your coin when no one else would. You gave me hope. The words hit Elias like a wave, stirring something he thought he'd buried, a flicker of purpose, of the man he'd been before betrayal broke him. The moment shattered as boots pounded outside, Harrow's voice slicing through the storm. Crow. You can't hide forever. The soldiers had found the passage, their torches casting flickering shadows through the shipyard's gaps. Elias scanned the maze of wrecked ships, his pirate instincts kicking in. Stay low, he whispered, pulling Lucien toward a derelict sloop half sunk in the mud. Its hold was a powder keg, barrels of gunpowder left from some forgotten raid. A plan formed, reckless and desperate. Elias rigged a fuse from a torn rag and flint, his hand steady despite the ache in his leg. This blows we're all dead, he warned Lucien. But it's our only shot. Harrow's men breached the shipyard, their swords drawn, their red coats stark against the gray rain. Harrow himself stepped forward, his cold eyes glinting like steel. You're protecting a traitor, Crow, he called, his voice dripping with menace. The governor pays well for dead princes. Hand him over and I'll forget your name. Elias's grip tightened on his dagger. He could light the fuse, risk the explosion, and hope it scattered Harrow's men. Or he could face them head-on, a lone pirate against a dozen soldiers and likely die. If you were Elias, the story seemed to growl through the thunder, would you light the fuse and risk innocent lives to save the boy or face Harrow's men knowing you'll likely die? Tell me in the comments because this choice will change everything. Elias's hand hovered over the flint, the fuse hissing faintly as rain licked its edge. Lucien's eyes locked onto his, trusting, terrified. The soldiers advanced, their boots squelching in the mud, their blades catching the lightning's flash. Then a new sound cut through the storm, distant cannon fire, the creak of sails. Elias glanced to the harbor where ships emerged from the mist, their flags barely visible but unmistakable, the colors of the Spanish Navy. Allies or more enemies? Before he could decide, he struck the flint, the fuse sparking to life. Run, he shouted, shoving Lucien toward cover. The explosion rocked the shipyard, a fireball swallowing the sloop and scattering Harrow's men like leaves in the wind. Elias tackled Lucien behind a broken mast, shielding him as splinters rained down. The air choked with smoke, the ground trembling under their feet. Elias's ears rang, his vision blurring, but Lucien's voice broke through. You saved me again. As the smoke cleared, the Spanish ships loomed closer, their cannons glinting in the storm's light. Friend or foe, they were coming, and Elias's gamble had just changed the game. If this twist has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button, the story urged, its voice rising above the chaos. Because the battle for Port Royal is just beginning, and the truth about Lucien will shake the empire to its core. The shipyard burned, a hellscape of splintered wood and choking smoke in Port Royal's storm-lashed night of 1720. The explosion Elias Crow had triggered roared like a dragon, its flames licking the sky, scattering Captain Harrow's soldiers like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Elias crouched behind a shattered mast, his bad legs screaming, his tattered coat singed from the blast. Beside him, Lucien de la Vega, the beggar-turned prince, clutched his royal locket, his green eyes wide with shock but blazing with resolve. The air reeked of gunpowder and scorched timber, the storm's rain hissing as it met the fire. Out in the harbor, the Spanish Navy ships loomed through the mist, their cannons glinting like predators' eyes. Friend or foe, they were closing in, and Elias's reckless gamble had just turned Port Royal into a battlefield. Elias's heart pounded, his dagger slick in his calloused hand. He'd been a pirate captain once, feared across the Caribbean, but years of betrayal and loss had dulled his edge, until Lucien's desperate plea had rekindled something fierce within him. The boy was no beggar. He was the heir to the Spanish Empire, hunted by a corrupt governor and his enforcer, Harrow, who'd sell their souls for power. Elias's single act of kindness, giving his last gold coin, had dragged him into a war he hadn't chosen but couldn't walk away from. The fuse he'd lit had bought them time, but Harrow's men were regrouping, their red coats flickering through the smoke like bloodstains on the night. Stay down, Elias hissed, pulling Lucien deeper into the shipyard shadows. The boy's ragged clothes were torn, his face smudged with ash, but his grip on the locket was iron tight. Those ships, Lucien whispered, his voice trembling yet steady, they're loyalists. My father's men. They've come for me. Elias squinted through the rain, spotting the Spanish flags snapping in the wind. Hope flickered but so did doubt. Loyalists or not, they'd see Elias as a pirate, a man with a price on his head. His bad leg throbbed, a reminder of the cannonball that had ended his old life. He wasn't built for running anymore, but fighting? That he could do. The soldiers rallied, Heir's cold voice cutting through the chaos. Crow. You can't save the boy. His silhouette emerged from the smoke, sword drawn, his polished boots incongruous against the muddy wreckage. The governor owns this town. Give up the prince and I'll let you crawl back to your rum-soaked hole. Elias's jaw clenched. Heir was a snake, his red coat hiding a heart that thrived on betrayal. Men like him had burned the Black Dawn and left Elias a ghost. He wouldn't let Lucien fall to the same fate. Elias's eyes darted to the shipyard's edge, where a derelict brig offered cover. Move, he growled, shoving Lucien toward it. They scrambled through the debris, the storm's thunder masking their steps. Elias's pirate instincts surged, his mind mapping the terrain like a chart. He knew Port Royal's underbelly, every alley, every hidden cache. The brig's hold held rusted cutlasses and a flintlock pistol, relics of a raid gone wrong. He grabbed the pistol, checking its powder with trembling hands. One shot. That's all he'd get. Heir's men closed in, their blades flashing as lightning tore the sky. Elias pushed Lucien behind a crate, his voice low. When I say run, you run for those ships. Don't look back. Lucien's eyes widened. You're coming with me. Elias shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his scarred face. Not this time, lad. Someone's gotta hold the line. The boy's protest died as Heir stepped into view, his sword pointed at Elias's chest. Last chance, pirate, Heir spat. The boy or your head. The world slowed, the storm's roar fading to a dull pulse. Elias saw his crew in his mind's eye, their faces as the Black Dawn burned, their screams haunting him still. He'd failed them, but not Lucien. His hand tightened on the pistol, his bad leg steady for the first time in years. Go to hell, Heir, he growled and fired. The shot caught Heir's shoulder, spinning him back with a howl. The soldiers charged, their swords a blur, and Elias dove forward, his dagger slashing, his body shielding Lucien. A blade grazed his side, pain flaring like fire, but Elias fought on, his pirate blood singing. He parried a thrust, tackled a soldier into the mud, and bought Lucien seconds to run. Then a sharp crack, a musket shot. Elias staggered, blood blooming across his chest, the world tilting. He fell to his knees, Lucien's scream piercing the haze. Elias. The boy rushed back, dropping beside him, his hands fumbling at the wound. You can't die. The locket swung free, its crowned lion catching the firelight, a symbol of the empire Elias had unknowingly saved. Through the smoke, the Spanish ships landed, their crews storming the shore. Lucien stood, his voice breaking as he held up the locket. I am Lucien de la Vega, heir to the empire, he shouted, the words carrying over the chaos. The loyalists froze, then rallied, their muskets roaring as they overwhelmed Heir's men. Heir, clutching his bleeding shoulder, was dragged away in chains, his corruption laid bare by documents spilling from his coat, proof of his ties to the usurper. Elias's vision blurred, the pain a distant tide. Lucien knelt beside him, tears mixing with the rain. You gave me everything, the boy whispered. Why? Elias coughed, a weak smile breaking through. Because someone had to. The story paused, its voice rising through the storm. If you were Elias, would you give your life for a cause you barely understand or fight to live another day? Tell me in the comments because this moment will define a legacy. The loyalists lifted Elias, their voices a blur as they hailed him a hero. Lucien's hand gripped his, the locket pressed into Elias's palm. The wound burned, but he was alive, barely. As the Spanish captain promised to restore Lucien to his throne, a new sound rose, the distant march of boots. The governor's army was coming, 1,000 strong, to crush the rebellion before it began. Elias's eyes met Lucien's, a spark of defiance still burning. The fight wasn't over. If you're cheering for Elias's bravery, smash that like button and keep watching, the story urged, its words pulsing through the firelit night. Because the battle for Port Royal is far from done, and Elias's sacrifice might just change the fate of an empire. The harbor of Port Royal burned under the storm-swept sky of 1720, its flames dancing like demons against the black waves. Elias Crow lay propped against a shattered crate, blood seeping from the musket wound in his chest, each breath a knife twisting deeper. His tattered coat, soaked with rain and crimson, clung to his scarred frame, but his gray eyes still burned with a pirate's defiance. Beside him, Lucien de la Vega, the beggar-turned heir to the Spanish Empire, stood tall, his royal locket glinting in the firelight. The Spanish loyalists had overrun Captain Harrow's men, their muskets silencing the redcoats in a hail of lead. Harrow himself was chained, his corruption exposed, but a greater threat loomed. The governor's army, 1,000 boots marching through the storm, their drums a death knell echoing over the town. Elias's single act of kindness, giving his last gold coin, had sparked a rebellion, and now Port Royal teetered on the edge of war. The air reeked of gunpowder and salt, the storm's thunder blending with the roar of cannons from the loyalist ships. Lucien's green eyes, once hollow with hunger, now blazed with purpose as he rallied the Spanish troops. "For the Empire," he shouted, holding his locket high, its crowned lion a beacon in the chaos. Elias coughed, blood flecking his lips, but a grim smile tugged at his scarred face. He'd been a pirate captain once, feared across the Caribbean, until betrayal sank his ship, the Black Dawn, and broke his spirit. Lucien's desperate plea had dragged him back to life, and his sacrifice in the shipyard had given the boy a chance to reclaim his throne. But the governor's army was closing in, their torches flickering through the rain like a swarm of fireflies. This wasn't over. "Get up, old man," Lucien said, his voice fierce as he knelt beside Elias. "You're not dying on me." Elias chuckled, wincing as pain lanced through him. "Not planning to lat. But you've got an empire to win." His bad leg throbbed, a relic of a cannonball from his pirating days, but his mind was sharp, mapping Port Royal's defenses like a chart etched in his bones. He knew the town's secrets, hidden tunnels, weak walls, caches of powder stashed by smugglers. If they could hold the harbor, they could turn the governor's army back. The loyalist captain, a grizzled man with a face like weathered oak, helped Elias to his feet. "You're the pirate Crow," he said, respect in his eyes. "Heard of you. Thought you were dead." Elias spat blood into the mud. "Not yet." He pointed to the fort overlooking the harbor, its cannons silent but deadly. "Governor's men'll take that first. We block it, we choke their advance." Lucien nodded, his young face hardening into a leader's. "Then we take the fort," he said, and the loyalists cheered, their swords flashing in the lightning's glow. The battle erupted like a storm breaking. Cannons thundered, the harbor a cauldron of smoke and fire. Elias limped at Lucien's side, his dagger and stolen cutlass a blur as he cut through the governor's scouts. His wound burned, but adrenaline drowned the pain, his pirate blood singing for the first time in years. He shouted orders, directing loyalists to barricade the fort's gates, to rig powder kegs along the walls. The governor's army charged, their red coats a-tide against the harbor's edge, but Elias's traps slowed them. Explosions rocked the streets, collapsing alleys and scattering troops. "Like old times," he muttered, a spark of his old swagger returning. Lucien fought like a lion, his borrowed sword clumsy but fierce, inspired by Elias's sacrifice. The loyalists chanted his name, their morale unbreakable as they held the fort. Elias, leaning against a cannon, spotted the governor himself, a corpulent man in a gilded coat, directing his troops from a hill. "There's your target," Elias rasped, pointing. Lucien's eyes locked on the governor, and he nodded, rallying a squad to charge. The story paused, its voice rising through the chaos. "If you were Elias, would you trust a boy to end this war or fight to the last breath yourself? Tell me in the comments, because this moment will shape an empire." The tide turned as Lucien's squad broke through, capturing the governor and shattering his army's resolve. The redcoats fled, their drums silenced, the storm washing away their blood. Port Royal was free, and Lucien stood atop the fort, his locket raised to the cheering loyalists. He turned to Elias, who slumped against the wall, his strength fading. "You gave me this," Lucien said, pressing the locket into Elias's hand. "You gave me everything." Elias's vision blurred, but he saw the boy's face, not a beggar's but a king's. The loyalist captain offered Elias a pardon, a place in the new government. Elias shook his head, his smile weary but free. "I'm no courtier," he said. "Give me a ship and I'm gone." Lucien, now recognized as the heir, granted his wish, a sleek brigantine, its sails white as hope, christened the Dawn's Mercy. The name hit Elias like a wave, a nod to his lost Black Dawn and the mercy he'd shown a beggar. As he boarded, the crew saluted, and Lucien placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll always have a home here," the boy said, his voice thick. Elias nodded, the locket heavy in his pocket, a symbol of a life reclaimed. If this tale of pirates, princes, and redemption moved you, click the video on the screen for another unforgettable story. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a super chat to keep these tales coming. Years later, Lucien, now emperor, named a port after Elias, its lighthouse a beacon for lost souls. Sometimes the smallest coin can buy the greatest treasure, a chance to change the world.